Hi, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to OneClass. My name is Kevin, and today I will be tutoring economics. A little bit of a background about me. I hold both a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in economics. I also work as an economist. And what I'm going to be doing today is going over questions from our people that sent in questions. I will be reviewing the answers by our junior tutors, adding anything that I think may be useful, walking you through any formulas. Get started here. Looks like this is working. First question reads as follows. The leading U.S. beer manufacturers utilize large, fast, and technically advanced machinery to produce their beers at a very low cost. How does the machinery affect how oligopolistic the U.S. beer industry is? So first, you got to go over the characteristics of an oligopoly. There are four. First characteristic of an oligopoly is that there are going to be few sellers. And that's kind of the main point of an oligopoly. It's not like a monopoly where there's only one seller, but it's not like a perfect competition where there's many sellers. There are only a few sellers in an oligopoly. Second, and probably most important to this question, there are going to be barriers to entry. So barriers to entry means that any firm cannot easily enter and exit the market. There can be a variety of reasons for barriers to entry, but this can also be written as no free entry and exit. There's either 2 or 3 more. And I don't want to lead you astray by trying to get them off the top of my head. Interdependence. Which means that these firms work together. And lastly, a prevalent amount of advertising. You can think with the beer industry in particular, there is a ton of advertising because they have similar products that they're trying to differentiate from one another. Prevalent. So the leading U.S. beer manufacturers utilize large, fast, and technically advanced machinery to produce their beers at a very low cost. How does this machinery affect how oligopolistic the U.S. beer industry is? In our junior tutor, I said that a few firms that make it to market will have an oligopolistic market structure. They will have the necessary technology and bargaining power to price new entrants and smaller players. Ideally, technically advanced machinery will only be available to certain companies in the industry, and this will allow them to retain their dominant market share as their products will be priced lower than the new entrants. Thus, the technically advanced machinery will mean that the market is solidly oligopolistic, and that new entrants cannot afford such machinery will be kept out of the market. It enhances the oligopolistic strength. So maybe new entrants can't afford the machinery to produce beers at a super low cost, or perhaps they don't have access to the technology, but for whatever reason, this large, fast, and technically advanced machinery acts as a barrier to entry and prevents new firms from joining. We can move on to question 2 here. Question 2 reads, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and Canada do not have a national debt ceiling. Give 3 examples of how this has affected these countries positively and negatively. So first off, a national debt ceiling. A national debt ceiling is some sort of cap or limit on the amount of debt a country can or is willing to accumulate. So it is a cap or limit to debt accumulation for a given country. Our junior tutor has said, give 3 examples of how this has affected these 3 countries positively and negatively. Truth be told, I don't know much about how it's affected Sweden and to a lesser extent the UK, but I can comment on how it has affected Canada. Looks like our junior tutor did a very good job summarizing anyways. Junior tutor has said that the national debt is the public and intragovernmental debt owed by the federal government. So intragovernmental means between provinces. The national debt is the public and intragovernmental debt owed by the federal government. The national debt is rising when federal government is spending more than receipt in the form of revenue, basically when they're spending more than they're earning. The national debt ceiling limits the extent to which the country can issue bonds, treasury bills, and raise the debt. Sweden, the United Kingdom, and Canada do not have national debt ceilings. This indicates that the federal government can spend as much as possible without any limitation. The examples can be coded as extensive relief measures by the government during natural calamities, so I will call that disaster relief. If there is no national debt ceiling, the government can spend expensively during natural calamities like hurricanes. For example, Hurricane Katrina happened in the States recently. Well, not recently, I guess, but when I was younger. And obviously there was an immense amount of spending needed to take place to help rebuild New Orleans. 2, our junior tutor has listed high spending on Social Security, so that the government offers extensive aid to senior citizens in the form of Social Security. So this is things like the Old Age Supplement or the Canada Pension Plan, which everybody in Canada is entitled to once they hit a certain age, being 65. And these the Social Securities, help prevent seniors from living out their years poor or unable to care for themselves. 3, high spending on Medicaid and Medicare. In Canada, we call it free healthcare. Government can spend liberally on mandated programs like Medicaid and Medicare. So in Canada, if you hurt yourself, you're in some kind of accident, you need to take an ambulance. That is covered by your taxes. Whereas in the United States and in some other countries, you would need to pay for that yourself. So as a result, those that are wealthy in the United States have more and better access to healthcare. And there may be an example in which you need an ambulance in the States, but you opt not to get one because you cannot afford it. Lastly, our junior tutor said stronger economic growth. And they said high expenditure by the federal government boosts the economic growth in the form of high production and GDP growth rate, will also improve the level of employment in the economy. So maybe an example of there's some sort of natural disaster, the government will be spending. This could come in the form of relief jobs, people trying to help out where the natural disaster was, and things of that nature. There's also good debts and bad debts. So on a micro example, if you're in debt and that debt you owe 2% interest on, and you're using that debt to earn an interest rate higher than that, maybe 5 or 6% or something along those lines, then you are technically coming out on top. This is called leveraging yourself on a micro level. Some debt on a macro level is good as well. Negative aspects, what it really boils down to is a high tax imposed on the public. Sooner or later, when the government has to clear the debt, high taxes are imposed on the public to increase revenue and thus to clear the debt. So as a result of the government spending more during natural disasters, Social Security, healthcare, things of that nature, as a result, taxes are going to be higher because they need to fund this spending by taxing their citizens. So I thought that was a very good answer by our junior tutor. We can move on to question 3. An industry is made up of 8 firms with identical sales. What is the 4-firm concentration ratio of that industry? So the 4-firm concentration ratio. I believe is the sales of the top 4 firms divided by the sales of the entire industry. I'm going to Google that quickly, but I believe that's it. Yeah, sum of total sales. So I can write 4-firm concentration ratio. It's going to equal the sum sales of top 4 firms. And it's going to be divided by the sum of all sales. It's kind of large E I'm using denotes sum of or summing across. So if we're made up of 8 firms with identical sales, that means if you divide 100% of sales, if you divide that by 8, that's what each firm has. So each firm is going to have 12.5% of total sales. We can just multiply that by 4 because we know the top 4 firms are going to have the same amount of sales. And of course, divide that by 100%. And we should be left with a 4-firm concentration ratio of 50%. Yeah, and our junior tutor has come to the same conclusion. Part B, downsize this a bit. Is this try that again. Is this industry an oligopoly? Why or why not? So in this case, we would use something called the HHI index, which basically measures the concentration of an industry. Actually, I think the I in HHI stands for index, but I'm going to bring it up because I remember that the 2 H's are very long names of some very smart gentlemen. The Herfindahl-Hirschman index, or in my case, the Herfindahl-Hirschman index measures the concentration. It's a common measure of market concentration. These determine market competitiveness, often pre and post M&A transactions. I believe it's when it's less than like some number, it's competitive, less than 1,500 apparently. Regardless, we compute the HHI index as follows. So you essentially take the square of each firm's total sales and you add it together. So in our case, is going to equal 12.5 squared for the first firm plus 12.5 squared for the second firm plus plus 12.5 squared for the 8th firm. Knowing that there's 8 firms, we can just say that this is 8 for each of the firms times 12.5 squared, being their share of sales squared. Our junior tutor has pointed out that 12.5 squared is equal 156.25. So you can say 8 times 156.25. And our HHI index comes out to 1250. Our junior tutor says, since HHI is less than 1,800, it is a competitive marketplace, but I thought they referred to it as 1,800 in this document here, and that's how I seem to remember it from undergrad. Or 1,500, sorry. Or am I getting myself confused? Yes, I am. So it's how I remember it from undergrad and how Investopedia defines it as when the HHI is less than 1,500, it's competitive. They've got 1,800. Either way, the number we come out to, 1,250, is less than both of those. So according to the HHI, the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index, this is going to be a competitive marketplace. We can move on. So Goodrich Porter and Star Connections are the only two airport shuttle and limousine rental service companies in the mid-sized town of Godric Hollow. Each firm must decide on whether to increase its advertising spending to compete for customers. Table above shows the payoff matrix for this advertising game. This is in reference to some game theory. Okay, so it's not that it's just not showing up on my screen, it just wasn't included in the question. So obviously the question cannot be answered. This is in reference to game theory. A dominant strategy is one that one player will play every single time because it's always the best strategy no matter what their opponent does. Game theory is quite interesting and can get quite complex. So I would recommend reading into it further if it interests you. Unfortunately, there's no example for me to go through here today. So that's in reference. These are both in reference to question 2. Question 3, suppose Walmart and Target both advertise that they will match the lowest price offered by any competitor. What is the purpose of such a strategy? And our junior tutor has nailed it exactly. The strategy for that is to attract new customers and hold the current ones. So they're going to hold the current ones in that people that already shop at Walmart know that if they see an ad for Target, they can just bring that price in and get their shop done all in one place. And people that are thinking about shopping at Walmart may be more incentivized to go there due to the lowest price matching that they may get at their other store. All right, that was question 3. We can move on here to number 4. Go to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, external site, the BEA website, and look at quarterly data from the last few years of the national accounts. Can you make a decision of what parts of the business cycle the U.S. economy is currently in? Why? What factors lead to this conclusion? And you may want to do additional research on sources to reach a conclusion. If so, please identify the sources that added to your analysis. With something like this, I will go through what our junior tutor said, and maybe I can try to bring it up on the side here with the Bureau. I don't know if I'm going to find what I'm going to need to follow along. Here on the right, we see the real GDP change from quarter. Obviously, this huge reduction in quarter 2 is COVID hits. A lot of jobs are lost. The unemployment rate spikes. GDP contracts. And then in the third quarter, we bounce back a bit. A lot of restaurants open patios for the summertime. The virus was more under control than it is now, so we bounce back. I would assume that in the fourth quarter, with cases again rising and places like Toronto and Peel going back into lockdown, that we will see the percentage change be negative again. But I'll read through what our junior tutor said here and see if there's any way I can add to it. So our junior tutor said the Bureau of Economic Analysis is a government body that provides a detailed report on all statistics related to the country's national accounts, focuses mainly on macroeconomic indicators and industrial reports. So I just made a reference to what happened in Canada there. This is a US website and will be US statistics. Although pretty much all nations in the world are going to follow this kind of general bounce in GDP, where there was a massive contraction in Q2 and a bounce back in Q3. The states are imposing less lockdowns than they are in Canada, to my knowledge at least. So my commentary may not be spot on in that sense. National accounts provides us with data on the economy of the nation, looks at household, government, and corporate expenditure and output. It also looks at its impact on other economies. The gross domestic product, GDP, is perhaps the most important part of the national accounts. It's certainly the most referenced. It measures the value of all goods and services produced in the economy over a given period of time, usually quarterly or annually. In this case, we're looking at quarterly data. The rise and fall in GDP is a reflection of the economic environment in the country and of the current business cycle in which the economy is engaged. There are 4 phases in the business cycle. There are expansion, peak, contraction, and trough. When the economy is in the throes of expansion, production and price levels are rising, while interest rates and unemployment are low. The next stage is the summit. At this stage, the economy is producing at an optimum level, and inflationary pressures are being exerted on the economy's price levels. This leads the economy to a contractionary stage where the production and price levels start dropping and unemployment and interest rates start rising. Finally, the economy is in the trough stage when production is at the lowest, and from here the economy can only expand and not fall further. So the last couple of years up until COVID struck have been very good for the economy. So locally, looking in this range we're looking at here from 2016 to 2020, quarter 4 here would have been the peak. We would have started quarter 1 of 2020, and then the pandemic would have hit. So thus would have began the transaction, or the, what was I trying to say there? The contraction, sorry. This happens very quickly. Unemployment spikes. We had a trough here during Q2. And then we begin our recovery as we head towards Q3, and some businesses are able to open back up. So here we can see the economy was growing steadily between the tune of 0 and 5% through 2016, through 2017, 2018, 2019. We peak at the end of 2019. There's a contraction, we hit a trough, and then we begin to recover. If we look at GDP data for the second quarter of 2017, see the GDP has risen to 3.1% per annum, and the real gross domestic income has increased by 2.7% per annum. In the first quarter, real GDP was just 1.2% per annum, and real GDI was only 2.7%. When we average the GDP and GDI for the second quarter of 2017, we can see that the economy has grown by 3%. This is one of the main characteristics of an economy at an expansionary stage. So all of these, from Q4 2016 up to Q4 2019, the economy was steadily expanding. One of the main reasons for this increase was an increase in private investment, government spending, and a fall in imports. Although exports also decreased during this quarter, the decrease in imports was higher, and therefore the net exports remained positive. Net exports represent a difference in exports and imports. Theoretically, an increase in GDP of over 3% per annum happens when the economy is at its peak. That is accompanied by inflation. However, the economy did not experience any inflationary pressures in the second quarter of 2017. This indicates that the economy is in the expansion phase and has not yet reached its peak. So it's important for me to note that what we're looking at here is real GDP, and it already includes inflationary pressures. So here in Q4 2017, it looks like real GDP went up about 4%. Perhaps nominal GDP went up by 6%, but inflation also increased by 2% during that quarter. then the real GDP, the real increase, would be the 6% increase in nominal GDP minus the 2% increase in inflation. Another indication that the economy is in the expansion phase is that the dollar is currently very strong. Current dollar GDP has increased by 4.1% in the second quarter of 2017. Dollar has been going strong in the last few years because the government has halted its expansionary monetary policy. Expansionary monetary policy is when a government increases the supply of its currency in the economy to enhance economic activity in it. So what that looks like is if I draw money market graph quickly, we've got money demand sloping down, money supply sloping up. We've got the quantity of money. An expansionary monetary policy will increase the money supply, maybe by buying back their own government bonds or something else. As a result, decrease interest rates. This has led to a limit on the dollars available and hence has improved its rate. The rise in interest rates is also another reason for the rise in the value of the dollar. So the growing GDP without the inflationary pressure, increasing rate of the dollar, higher interest rates are all indicators that the economy is in the expansion phase. That is an excellent write-up by our junior tutor. Yeah, it's interesting to be able to, it looks like this answer is older given the referencing 2017 several times. So it's interesting to be able to cross-reference that with what we're seeing currently, a pretty tumultuous time during the economy. Move on here. Question 5. Consider a market where supply and demand are given by QXS equals -10 plus PX. So that's quantity supplied. Supply. Quantity equals -10 plus P, and demand Q equals 68 minus 2P. So the government imposes a price floor of $30 and agrees to purchase and discard any and all units consumers do not buy at the floor price of $30 per unit. Compute the lost social welfare that stems from the $30 price floor. So of course, in free market equilibrium, quantity demanded here is going to equal the quantity supplied. So what that means is setting these two equal to each other. So we're going to get 68 minus 2P is going to equal -10 plus P. Moving this over, we get 68 plus 10 on the left. That's going to be 78. And we get P plus 2P. It's going to equal 3P on the right. And so as a result, plus sign, we can say that our free market P star is going to be $26. I'll draw this out in a graph in a second. It's easier to work through the math first, then move to the drawing. Now that we have our equilibrium price, we can plug it back into one of these equations to get the equilibrium quantity. So we can just plug in the first one. Q is going to equal -10 plus 26. So Q star, our equilibrium free market quantity, is going to be 16. Not sure why I hit you guys with the double equal sign. this point, I can draw that out. So of course, we've got quantity on our x-axis, price on our y-axis, supply slopes up, demand slopes down. We've got this equilibrium quantity here of 16, and this equilibrium price here of 26. Now, the government wants to impose a price floor of 30, I think. So what we need to do now is plug 30 into our supply and demand equations to figure out the amount that people are going to be demanding and the amount that firms are going to be supplying. So if P equals 30, then our supply Q is going to equal -10 plus P, please 30. So our supply quantity is going to come out to 20. I'm doing my time here. Our demand is going to equal 68 minus 2 times 30. So 68 minus 60. So our quantity demanded is only going to be 8 units. 16, boy, it looks like an 11. So our quantity supplied is going to be over here. That's where the price crosses the supply line. You draw down, that's 20. Price crosses the demand line. You draw down, that is going to be 8. Our junior tutor then goes on to say that this quantity the producers were willing to supply only at price. What I'm trying to say there. So quantity supply is going to be -10 plus the price. Oh, okay, so I understand now. So there's only going to be 8 units supplied because that's all the demand there is. So we can say 8. These 8 units supplied are going to equal -10 plus the price. Which means the P star in this market would have been 18 if it weren't for the price floor. That's going to be this point here. And as a result, we know that our deadweight loss is going to be this area here. So what we're seeing here is a surplus because there is going to be more supply than is demanded. At the quantity demanded, the corresponding supply would have been supplied at a price of $18. So now we take this area here that I've highlighted to determine the deadweight loss. So the vertical component is going to be 30 minus 18. And we need to multiply that by the horizontal component, which is going to be 16 minus 8. Oh, sorry, I'm actually doing this wrong, I think. Gonna have to do it in 2 chunks. First, we'll have to do the consumer surplus, so that's 30 minus 26 times 16 minus 8, which is 8, over 2. 4 times 8 is 32 over 2, should be 16. It's going to be our consumer surplus. Junior Tutor had the same answer, which is good. Then our producer surplus is going to be this bottom area of the triangle. So that's going to be 26 minus 18. That'll be our height. Our base is going to be the same, 16 minus 8. That comes out to 8. Divide that by 2, that's 8 times 8, which is 64 over 2. It's going to be 32. That's going to be our producer surplus. Then our deadweight loss. Going to equal 32 plus 16, aka the consumer surplus, plus the producer surplus that we're missing out on. So our total deadweight loss is going to be 48. Junior Tutor looks like has the same answer. So yeah, when a price floor is implemented or a price ceiling, in this case, a price ceiling of $30 would have no effect, but I digress. When a price floor is instituted, the goods won't be sold at their equilibrium quantity and price, and as a result, there will be deadweight loss characterized by the total surplus, which is this triangle here, to the left of what would be the market equilibrium, and to the right of where the price meets the demand. Move on to question 6. I am running out of time a bit here. Actually, I'm really running out of time. The explanation for the law of demand involves consumers' ability to substitute different goods. Why? Our junior tutor said that the law of demand states that demand for a quantity and prices are inversely related to each other. When prices rise, the quantity demanded falls, keeping in mind exceptions like luxury goods, income effect, necessities, etc. So if I just draw our supply and demand graph real quick, we got quantity, got price, supply rises, demand falls. Where they cross, we've got our equilibrium quantity, denoted Q star. That's a star. Take my word for it. And equilibrium price, P star. So the law of demand states that demand for quantity and prices are inversely related to each other. So when prices are high, up here in the y-axis, there is lower demand, and quantity demand rises. As these prices fall, demand rises. So at this point here, maybe this high price, there's no demand. Price here, there's a smaller amount of demand, and when prices get really low, there's a lot of demand. So for example, when things go on sale at the store, you're more likely to buy them, the demand is higher. The law of demand involves government ability to set a price, consumers' ability to substitute different goods, because when the price of one good rises, the demand for its substitute rises. So for example, like if I'm really craving I don't know, like pizza, and the price of pizza everywhere goes up, then maybe I'll substitute some other kind of fast food, and instead the demand for burgers is going to go up because nobody wants to pay the price of pizza, which is now more expensive. The relationship between price and substitute goods is positive, but people keep in mind the same way because they react only when the price of the first one rises. Hence, the demand for the other is nothing but a reaction to the change in the price of the first. In other words, if there is no substitute for a good, people aren't going to respond as much to a change in the price. But if there is a number of other goods, when there's a change in price, there will be a larger change in demand. That's a good write-up by our junior tutor. We can move on. On the basis of the 3 individual demand schedules below, assuming that these 3 people are the only ones in the society, determine A, the market demand schedule on the assumption that the good is a private good, and B, the collective demand schedule, the assumption that the good is a public good. It's basically private versus public. They didn't include that, the actual demand schedule in the question, but our junior tutor has it in our answer. So we can kind of deduce what happened based on that. So our junior tutor basically gave us how we go about this. Private demand. So try that again. Our private demand is going to be the sum of individual demands, basically. So individual 1 demands 1 unit at $16, individual 2 demands 1 unit at $16, and individual 3 demands 1 unit at $16. So the private demand is going to be that same price, $16, plus the sum of the quantity demanded, which comes out to 3. Public demands, on the other hand, we are going to sum prices vertically. So in that same example, we've got individual 1 demanding 1 unit at a price of $16, individual 2 demanding 1 unit at a price of $16, and individual 3 demanding 1 unit at a price of $16. What we're going to do is sum the prices. So we can say that the public demand, sum of all public demands, is the price of $48 for 1 unit. And this, you can extrapolate that to across each of the prices and quantity demanded to build demand curves. I would graph this if I have a little more, if I had a little more time, but I am finished streaming at 5:45 here. Yeah, so for example, when the price is $6, individual 1 is going to demand 6 units. Individual 2, same thing, $6, 6 units. Individual 3, same thing, $6, 6 units. So the private demands, we're going to sum the quantity demanded across the 3 individuals. So at a price of $6, there's 18 units. Whereas the public demand, we're going to sum the prices vertically. So the public demand is going to be a quantity demanded of 6 at a price of $18. Eight, I believe this is my second last question. I think Great Inflation Gone Wild by, I don't know, somebody's gamer tag. About 6 years ago, I was sitting in the student union of a small liberal arts college when I saw a graph on the cover of the student newspaper showed the history of grades given at that institution in the past 30 years. Grades were up, way up. I'm a scientist by training and I love numbers. So I guess this is an article written by somebody. I'm a scientist by training and I love numbers. So when I looked at that graph, I wondered how many colleges and universities have data like this that I could find. The answer is that a lot of schools have data like this hidden somewhere. Back then, I found more than 80 colleges and universities with data on grades, mostly by poking around the web. And I created a website, gradeinflation.com, so that others could find this data. I learned that grades started to shoot up nationwide in the 60s, leveled off in the 70s, and then started rising again in the 80s. What is this? Not secure. Cool. Thank you, mysterious author. It's beautiful. I created a website to find this data. Then the grades started to shoot up nationwide in the 60s, leveled off in the 70s, then started rising again in the 80s. He doesn't have data prior to the 80s here. It looks like it's a pretty linear relationship over time, in that average GPA is increasing by about half a GPA point every 5 years or so. Nonetheless, what about today? Grades continue to go up regardless of the quality of education. At a time when many are raising questions about the quality of U.S. higher education, the average GPA at public schools is 3, with many flagship state schools having average GPAs higher than 3.2. At a private college, the average is now 3.3. At some schools, even 3.6. At elite Brown University, 2/3 of all letter grades given are now A's. Changes in grading have had a profound influence on college life and learning. Students walk into a classroom knowing that they can go through the motions and get a B+ or better. That's what they tend to do, give minimal effort. Our college classrooms are filled with students who do not prepare for class. Many studies less than 10 hours a week. That's less than half the hours they spent studying 40 years ago. Paradoxically, students are spending more and more money on an education that seems to deliver less and less content. With so few hours filled with learning, boredom sets in and students have to find something to pass the time. Instead of learning, they drink. This sounds like some huge generalizations and shots being thrown at the younger generation. But anyways, a recent survey of more than 30,000 first-year students across the country showed that nearly half are spending more hours drinking than they were studying. If we continue along this path, we'll end up with a generation of poorly educated college graduates who will use their 4 years principally to develop an addiction to alcohol. There are also studies out there, I might add, that show that millennials, I don't know about Gen Z, but millennials binge drink less than the baby boomer generation, that they do less drugs than the baby boomer generation, but I digress. Many say that grade inflation is a complicated issue with no easy fix, but there are solutions. About the same time that I started to collect data on rising grades, Princeton University began to do something about its grade inflation problem. Its guidelines have the effect of now limiting A's on average to 35% of students in the class. Those guidelines have worked. Grades are going back down at Princeton, and academic rigor is making a comeback. A similar successful effort has taken place at Wellesley College in Massachusetts. And through a concerted effort on the part of faculty and leadership, grades at Reed College in Oregon have stayed essentially constant for 20 years. Princeton, Wellesley, and Reed provide evidence that the effort to keep grade inflation in check is not impossible. This effort takes 2 major steps. First, school officials must admit that there's a problem, then they must implement policies or guidelines that truly restore excellence. I asked Dean Nancy Malkiel at Princeton why so few schools seem to be following Princeton's lead. It's hard work, she answered, because you have to persuade the faculty that it's important to do the work. Making a switch will take hard work, but the effort is worthwhile. The alternative is a student body that barely studies and drinks out of boredom. That's not acceptable. College and universities must roll up their sleeves, bring down inflated grades, and encourage real learning. It's not an impossible task. There are successful examples that can be followed. I am looking forward to the day when we can return to being proud of the education that our nation's colleges and universities provide. Analyze Stuart Rostasser's argument in Grade Inflation Gone Wild, addressing the following questions. What evidence does he use to indicate that there's a problem? How would you characterize this evidence, for example, scientific or anecdotal? And to what extent are you persuaded by the evidence he provides to suggest that grade inflation has a profound effect on life and learning? To what extent does he persuade you that a change in policy is necessary or that such a change would make a difference? Old man yells at cloud. That's what I got out of that. Stewart has tried to establish a causal relationship between inflated grades and efforts made in studies, and research finds that there is a negative relationship. It means that higher grades with ease cause students to make less effort, thus the remaining time spent by students drinking and other leisurely activities can make a generation of young with poor educational understanding. Thus, it is the effect of inflated grades as a problem that is overseen by Stewart. 2, our junior tutor said that evidence given by Stewart is empirical evidence. He's collected the past data and observed and analyzed the classroom atmosphere of today, such as levels of students' homework, preparation, and criticism of U.S. higher education. Recent studies of students have also supported the issues raised by Stewart. Up to a certain extent, Stewart is persuaded, but he is not fully persuaded. It's because he has not put the light on the mechanism of grading of students. The change in the mechanism and application of more balanced, categorical approach will improve the grade. Thus, light in these aspects is not put in the given case. Also, colleges and universities, as well as students, focus on employability skills rather than grades. Employability skills land you a job, but grades can only give you a ticket for an interview. Lastly, Stewart is persuaded to revise the grading system as there is no harm in it. Regularly, it is also required, but the focus should be on building employability skills. Presence and access of a lot of data, tools meant to prepare better, students of today, better equipped for their studies in comparison to students of the 60s and 70s. My take on this article was that he seemed to make a lot of generalizations and assumptions without linking specific studies. Also, having been taught some studies in undergrad about things like the amount that students drink compared to our peers of past, this seems to go against what I've read. Lastly, Stewart should take a lesson in website design. Last question, I think, or I might be done. The U.S. Federal Reserve, central bank of the United States, has many roles in the economy, but one of its key roles is conducting monetary policy. 1, what is monetary policy? Junior tutor said that monetary policy is how the monetary authority of a country, generally a central bank, regulates the supply of money in the economy, has control over interest rates to maintain price stability and achieve high economic growth. That is completely correct. That's a perfect answer. 2, suppose the Fed wants to close an inflationary gap. How could it use each of the 3 tools of monetary policy to close the gap? Some of the tools are open market operations, monetary policy used to change bank reserves in the monetary base. That's correct. Reserve requirement. This refers to the portion that banks should maintain either in their vaults or by depositing at Federal Reserve Bank. And discount rate. This is the rate at which the banks and other depository institutions are charged to borrow from the Fed. Canada, we call that the overnight interest rate. To close an inflationary gap using monetary policy, the Fed, the equivalent of the Fed in Canada is the Bank of Canada, by the way, should decrease the money supply to decrease investment and consumer spending. This causes the aggregate demand curve to shift leftward. First graph shown below illustrates the inflationary gap, and the succeeding graph shows the closing of the inflationary gap. So basically here, this would lead to aggregate demand 2, moving closer down to aggregate demand 1. I was going to draw the money market graph. I drew that in an earlier question, and I believe I'm cutting into somebody else's streaming time now. That was a perfectly good answer by our junior tutor. All right. This has been Kevin from OneClass. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you have your own questions, I believe there should be a link at the bottom of this video. You can send in whatever economics question you have. Either myself or our other senior tutor, Ose, should be able to get to it sometime this week. Thank you for watching, and I hope everybody has a nice night.